Welcome for some unexpected affordable folder content. Several months ago, Valhalla Knives sent me a couple of samples to review. Their Pastor 1 and improved Pastor 2. And I really did kind of like the Pastor 2. I've carried it, I've used it. I did describe some of their designs initially as, shall we say, a bit kitschy, not necessarily the most functional, practical, at least, based on my tastes. But in their lineup, they did have a knife that really appealed to me, so I spent my own money on their Tyrannosaurus Rex, which does indeed bear more than a striking resemblance to my all-time favorite, a Spada. But it turned out to be a great knife, especially for the money. I've carried it and used it a lot. But it is a bit flashy, and we've talked about optics a lot on the channel when it comes to carry knives, so I figured I would go ahead and get myself something a little less flashy, a little bit more conventional looking. So I spent my own money again on their pterosaur. And if you saw the review I did on this recently, it is a really impressive knife, again, especially for the money. But I have been carrying this since then as what we'll call my secondary EDC. Valhalla has apparently been watching my reviews. They decided to send me a sample of a newer product, what they are calling their Slim EDC. And it is very slim and very light. Is it a good knife? Since they call it their Slim EDC, let's start with the folded specs, the in-the-pocket dimensions. First up, the weight. It is surprisingly light. A lot of Valhalla knives are known for being, well, pretty solid, pretty heavy. This is 1.8 ounces, 51 grams. Grip length folded is 3 7/8 inches, 9.5 centimeters. The width of it folded from the spine of the blade to the bottom of the grip, that is 3/4 of an inch, 19 millimeters. If I throw in the flipper, it's 22 millimeters with a thickness of 9 millimeters. Let me first give you a visual comparison to the pterosaur. Yeah, but also the other comparison that for me makes a lot of sense is consider this compared to the pen I'm often carrying, which is actually bigger. So given the carry dimensions, the weight, and my comparison to a pen, this is indeed a very slim, light carry. Disappears in my pocket. I often don't know I've got it on me unless I check, and I've been carrying it for about a week steady now. Nice pocket clip. It's not just a folded over piece of metal. Carries about that high. Despite the weight, the scales are actually stainless steel with this black finish that we'll talk about again in a minute. Gold highlights in terms of the screws and the pins, and there's some other textures on the scales for looks and also grippiness. Talk about that in feel and handling. It is a pillar construction, which I like on knives that I'm not going to use hard, especially pocket carry knives, because it makes it really easy to clean out the pocket lint and the gunk. Really like those flow-through designs. It is a frame lock. We'll talk about that again in a minute. With smooth action, but a very strong detent. I've got two ways to open this. I could use the flipper, or there is enough blade that I can grab a hold of the spine, break that detent. It's not going to open accidentally, and it flips open very smoothly, and the lock is indeed very secure. But my issues with the frame lock, that's all me. My stubby, stupid, arthritic, damaged fingers, and the fact that since I don't carry a frame lock, I don't have the motor memory for it, I tend to be working against myself. I think they went for the frame lock versus the liner lock to keep it slim. And one of the benefits over a liner lock is that a frame lock, well, it's naturally a thicker piece of material that as you are gripping the knife, you're actually gripping down on the lock and locking it in place, securing it. So it could be more secure than a liner. But that works against me when I try to open it, again, with my stupid damaged fingers. Because what tends to happen is I pick it up like any other folder and I go to use the flipper or whatever and don't realize I'm squeezing down for leverage on the frame lock and locking that detent in, and then the knife's not opening, and it takes me a second to remember why. I have to back off of it and then it opens just fine. But because it's so slim, I don't feel like I have much of a grip on it that way. Same thing also happens when I go to unlock it. If I'm not careful about where my fingers are, I will be swishing down on that frame lock without realizing it, working against myself. Now, I did add these notches in the lock. I do that to all my liner locks just to give my thumb a really positive purchase for leverage. But I have to remember to keep my other fingers out of the way. Actually works better if I do it in my left hand. Just because my fingers are naturally not in the way, but then it tends to be a two-handed closing. But let's talk a little bit about the finish. Don't know what the finish is on the scales, but you might see just a little bit of scuffing. And again, I think that's all me. I've been carrying it, like I said, constantly for about a week now, in the same pocket, right up against the pterosaur. So it is all day, every day, having sharp D2 hardened corners scraping and banging into it. And it hasn't taken much damage yet. And I'm not really worried about it. Why? Because, okay, this was a formerly black-coated aluminum tactical pen that I carried for years and years in the same pocket with my keys. And I'm just going to call that character. Before we talk about the blade, what about the price? I think currently on Amazon it's going for around 28 US dollars. I'll put the link in the description. I have seen it go on sale though. We talked about what the friendly end's made out of. You're getting a D2 steel blade that my test files confirm somewhere above 60 HRC with what's turned out to be an impressively durable black coating. And you'll see some of what I've done to it already in the test footage, but it's held up really well. It is a full flat grind. They describe it as a reverse Tonto blade, or you might call it a Warncliffe. It is 3 inches, 7.5 centimeters long, which for me comes in handy if I happen to be going to any of those big cities that have a 3-inch blade restriction. That works out really well. It is a pretty slim profile. The widest point front to back is 9/16 of an inch, about 1.5 centimeters, with a stock thickness of 2.6 millimeters. So pretty slim, pretty slicey. When it came to Marshall testing, I only did thrusting and stabbing. First into my Pell, which is multiple layers of thick cardboard backed up by a couple of inches of compressed brown paper bag paper up against my redwood target. It's a media that gives me more resistance the deeper I get into it. I use 4 grips in the test. Forward grip, edge facing away from me, edge facing towards me. Reverse grip, edge facing away from me, edge facing towards me. I did have to modify those grips. But the first thing I'm looking for in the test is penetration and channel. And yeah, that is a really keen stabby knife. I was a little concerned with its durability, but it didn't bend and it didn't loosen up. However, I'm also looking at how that linear impact translates back into my grip. Does my grip stay put? Any uncomfortable collisions? And the modifications I had to make actually were helped by the length, or at least the functional length of the grip. We talked about how long the grip is folded, but for me, functional length, if I'm measuring point to the end of it, that's 3.5 inches, 8.5 centimeters. So my medium width hands, yeah, my pinky is kind of off the end. So what I wound up doing naturally for grip security was simply shifting into a screwdriver grip, planting the end of the grip into the hollow of my hand in the forward grip. And then in the reverse grip, well, I was just naturally thumb locking it. But because there are some sharp corners, I started to feel a little bit of discomfort. And then moving up to stabbing directly into the redwood. Now, I'm not trying to destroy the knife, but I want to see how the tip will hold up impacting harder media. And I was pretty concerned. Again, this is a very keen, pointy knife, but I did not damage it. Also, that heavier impact with a folding knife, did it loosen up the build at all? No, not at all. The knife survived. But in that test, I can really feel harder, sharper impact back into my hands. So while the modified grips I was using did keep my hand from sliding up into danger, I did get more painful kickback. Okay, so granted the knife is probably not designed to be a self-defense tool. It is a easy to carry utility knife, and a very slicey one at that. So I have been, as I mentioned, carrying it for about a week, using it to, among other things, cut up a lot of large, thick cardboard boxes. And where I would have a better grip with some of those craton-handled knives I've reviewed recently, this one did just fine. I had a good grip on it, I had good control over it, and I think the job was made easier by just how keen and slicey this knife is. I also put it to food prep. It is basically a great pairing style knife, so cutting up fruit and vegetables. And yeah, it's apple season again, so my trees are producing, well, bushels and bushels. I did go ahead and invest in a cider press, so maybe I'll do a video on that in the future if you're interested. But I also put it to cutting up, preparing beef, pork, chicken. Yeah, did just fine there. And held up to being washed several times. Taking it out into my forest in the backyard, using it for small carving and trimming tasks. But the actual tests, all right, very slicey knife. Fine carving.
It's actually a pretty good tool.
I didn't expect it to do as well as it did. I felt like the handle would be uncomfortable, hand fatiguing, but it actually wasn't. I had really good control. No hot spots really to speak of. I did find that different sections of the blade were better at different jobs. For finer slicing and shaving, the lower half of the blade worked better. If I really had to press and dig into material, I did better. Combination of angle and a little bit more belly up here if I was using this as my sweet spot. So moving up to then doing some curls out of, in this case, some dry split fir. Yeah, it actually worked really good to do that. It's a good little carving tool. I also tried driving the knife into my stump and pulling against it. That worked just fine as well, if that's a way you use your tool. And also I carved some plant stakes out of some straight Indian plum branches. It's a pretty hard material, but basically what I'm doing is it's like sharpening a pencil.
Getting the best cutting angle closer to the tip. At least for this job.
This is where I found the sweet spot of the tip where I could really kind of press down in that material as I carved. It worked really well. Now, it's certainly too light for chopping, and I wouldn't use a folding knife that's not a cold steel triad in any way that I'm really pounding on it. But yeah, I figured I'd go ahead and take the risk, and Valhalla's probably going to hate me for it. I tried batoning with it.
Oh, Valhalla's probably going to freak out when they see me do this. This is not a good idea. Survived. Nice and tight. Yeah, I know. Really not designed for this. I stay away from the handle. It's just fine.
Now, I did pick some branch sections that were narrow enough so I could hit only the blade and gently, and I didn't actually have to pound on the grip or the pivot. I managed to pull that off a couple of times. Knife survived. Nothing loosened up. And I think more impressively, the finish still looks pretty much like new. I mean, you can see just a little bit of scuffing. I mean, I've cut up a lot of abrasive cardboard and plastic packaging and all the scrubbing I wind up doing after I get it gunky after food prep and, you know, the fruit acids and getting the tree sap off of it after I've been doing that sort of thing. But it's often when I'm batoning through wood that I see the most damage to finishes like this, and there really isn't any to speak of. Quick edge test. Yeah, that's pretty slicey. It's time, as always, to get to that balance between martial and utility that could potentially make for an awesome overall EDC versus having one knife on you as your utility knife and another one as your self-defense knife. And that's something that can also help with optics. If you happen to be anywhere where there are people sensitive to you being armed, some of those people might be law enforcement, being able to justify your carry as a tool and calling it a tool and not a weapon or self-defense knife, and having it look more like a tool than a weapon might help you out. And I'm going to say probably the scariest thing about this thing's appearance is the black finish. But otherwise, I don't think it looks like it was specifically designed to be a weapon. You'd probably call it a Wharncliffe and not a reverse Tonto because it implies certain things. But up close and in person, it is, well, very small looking. So that can decrease that intimidation factor, unless you're dealing with somebody who's scared of anything sharp and pointy. It was amusing when this thing was delivered to me in a shoebox-sized box. I'm thinking, how big is this thing? And then in the shoebox-sized box was this box, and then I opened this box, and something basically half the size of a pen falls out. Yeah, in person, this thing is pretty tiny and unobtrusive. Don't think too many people would be intimidated by it. But that 3-inch blade length, for me, is also very helpful. Most places I happen to be, there are no length restrictions, also no restrictions on the concealed carry of folders, but there are at least 3 big cities around me that I might find myself in that do have 3-inch blade restrictions. So having a good, useful, easy to carry 3-inch blade doesn't look too scary, could be a great thing. But how does it work, if at all, as a Marshall knife? When it comes to my Marshall impressions of this knife, I want to come at it from a different angle today. I've certainly paraphrased the wise words of Jorge Prina that the knife you use the most for the most things becomes the most familiar to you, and that can translate to using it for, shall we say, other purposes. Now, it's actually been several days since I made the last segment. Life got in the way of filming as it does. I'm sorry, Valhalla, for the delay. But in that time, I've continued to carry it every day, and I find myself reaching for it multiple times a day to apply it to a lot of different tasks that are suitable for a slim, slicey utility knife. So that's taught me I really do like it as a slim, slicey, easy to carry utility knife. So in that application, I feel like it's a great product and a great value for the money. But I realized I hadn't been training with it martially speaking. So I had to do that intentionally. And I found my use of it as a utility tool immediately informed that. Starting with deployment. I talked about my personal issues with frame locks, especially with a slim build like this. My fear is, under adrenaline, if I have to reach for this thing and deploy it in a hurry, my stupid fingers are going to clamp down on the thing for dear life. I'm going to push the frame into the detent, and it's not going to deploy. For me, at least, I found that when it comes to frame locks, I have to do it calmly and with some thought. But utility informing Marshall use. With knives of this length, I've spoken about this in previous videos, since it's not a short sword, it's not a chopper. The edge is not going to be my primary tool, but it has been a very useful utility tool, and I find I can get a actually really impressive grip on this thing in terms of leverage and security for cutting and carving and things like that. So potentially, given the right opportunity, I might be able to push that edge into a target in the forward grip at close range, or in the reverse grip. I've talked about my short knife paradox with the edge facing away from me, where I might again be able to push it into target media given the right opening opportunity. But in a real life or death situation, I'm going to be focusing on what I can do with the tip, because that's going to give me the most effect for my effort and timing. And in the thrusting and stabbing test, this indeed did prove itself to be a really impressive penetrator and pretty durable. Also, depending on edge orientation, did make a channel into the target media that was bigger than its profile. So there's some usefulness there. But we also talked about what I had to do about the grip design. So when I started to apply it, moving with it martially, I found myself in the forward grip naturally settling into not only a screwdriver grip, but specifically most often a foil grip, with my thumb on the side edge facing inward. Now, if I want a different cutting angle, I can rotate the edge that way, but that takes away anything I can do with the edge on the forward stroke. Second most popular grip my hand naturally settled into was a screwdriver grip in a saber grip. Yeah, it didn't feel too bad. In the reverse grip, okay, before we get there, transitioning to reverse grip with a knife this light, this slim, not a whole lot of room to be able to operate it with two hands and do that transition. And when it comes to, yeah, you've certainly seen me finger twirl it during the video. I don't recommend doing it because it's not very secure. And with this particular knife, I don't feel really dexterous with it. I feel like this would be a really easy knife to fumble in a transition. And I don't really have a great, well, index when it comes to doing a pinch flip with it. So turning this over in my hand, yeah, it just, oh, that makes me nervous. So I'm going to have to use it in whatever grip it's in. And if it happens to be in the reverse grip, with the edge facing away from me, it's not a bad thumb lock given the angle of the butt end, but if I turn the edge towards me to get that cutting action in the arc of the stab, I do have a sharp corner now going right into my thumb knuckle. So it's telling me not to hold it that way. Speaking of sharp corners, I feel like I could, if it was folded, maybe use one of those corners as an impact tool. I mean, it is steel, might even function as a glass breaker, but it is overall kind of smaller than the width of my hands. So again, not really designed to do any of these things. And speaking of design, I do want to kind of end on a thought experiment for y'all. And I call it a thought experiment because please don't do this with a live blade, especially one that you're not really familiar with. But when I'm evaluating a new purchase or somebody makes a recommendation or offers me a sample and I'm thinking about how I could apply it as a martial tool, I will immediately look at the design of the grip and consider this. If I was to grip it in whatever orientation and then drive the tip into a piece of wood with intent, with force, what's going to happen? Is my hand going to collide with anything sharp? Is that potentially going to injure me? Or speaking of injury, is my hand going to stay put? Or is that impact going to drive my fingers into danger? And I'm going to disable myself with my own blade. That is something I always look at and consider when I'm thinking about any knife design. And yeah, I'm going to say, looking at this one, definitely not built to do that. But I made it work. So I think my final conclusion is, if it was the only thing I had on me, and I absolutely had to use it for that, I could, then I could probably make decent use out of it. But again, not designed for that. All right, let's go ahead and stop the conversation here and get our own larger conversation going. If you have any thoughts about this knife or other slim EDCs, or if you would like to see more content on shorter blades, I really figure I need to start addressing knives that are 3.5 inches, 3 inches in blade for those of you, including me sometimes, who are in places that restrict blade length for carry. If you want to see more of that content, please let me know. But until next time, as always, thank you all so much for watching, liking, subscribing, following my journey, putting up with my madness, adding to the conversation, seeking me out on social media, and you will see me back for more knife content, sword content, and yes, I promise I will get back to the hawks and hatchets.